Welcome to La Chaîne Géopolitique. Welcome to all viewers who would like to learn more about any geopolitical news. So please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Today we will examine the situation in Lebanon in the aftermath, in the wake of the latest statement from Sheikh Sayyed Hassan Nasrallah, who declared yesterday that a humanitarian boat, left Iran to go to Lebanon. So it's not yet clear how this boat will arrive in Lebanon due to the fact that the political backlash that such, let's say, help could have on Lebanon, due to the fact that as Iran is under US sanction, how it remains to be seen how this boat can be, let's say, just accepted by the Lebanese authorities. And another question that need to be raised is there any risk of war or at least escalation? So we will try to answer to all those two questions during this video. So let's answer to the first question. Will the Lebanese authorities will allow this boat to be loaded in the Lebanese port? There is no clear answer right now. From one side, we are hearing a clear objection from certain Lebanese politicians like Saad Hariri, the former prime minister, which is very close, let's say, to powers like Saudi Arabia, France. Clearly, Mr. Hariri doesn't want to have any, wants to show that clearly Lebanon, it's in the interest of Lebanon to keep close ties with Saudi Arabia, with France, with the United States, due to the fact that, from a economic point of view, Lebanon is trading mainly with countries like Saudi Arabia. I think that it is his main exportation market, Saudi Arabia. So, for Saudi Hariri, if we allow Iran an Iranian ship in a Lebanese port, it means that clearly a country like Saudi Arabia could simply, let's say, block, could cut or reduce or undermine the commercial ties, for example, with Lebanon. It could be one of measures that retaliation measures that Saudi Arabia could take against Lebanon. So that's why many Lebanese politicians are very worried of such a move, or more than worried, are clearly worried due to the fact that it could have a devastating impact on Lebanon. But on the other side, from, for example, Hezbollah side, any help is welcome, whatever it comes from. Right now, Lebanon is facing a very dire humanitarian crisis. Just to remind you that there is currently nearly no electricity in Lebanon, only 2 hours per day. And so the rest of the day, Lebanese, or some Lebanese, can only use a generator, but a generator needs fuel. And also fuel is not, it's very costly and hard to find right now fuel in Lebanon. There are hours of queue around, let's say, a gas station in Lebanon. So, a very dire humanitarian situation. So, for also some Lebanese, wherever these humanitarian goods come from, is welcome. So we see that there is clearly, right now, we see that everyone wants to try to help Lebanon, either from Iran, as announced yesterday by Sheikh Nasrallah, but also we heard a couple of hours later, Egypt announcing that US would like to help Lebanon, so a boat could leave. It's not clear when Egypt to head for Lebanon. So we see everyone now is trying to help Lebanon. because they understand that there is a major geopolitical, let's say, consequences helping Lebanon. Lebanon is now in so weak position, financially, economically, socially, politically, that everyone tries simply to, let's say, to exert its influence on Lebanon. So clearly, on the occasion of Ashura, this statement has been made by Nasrallah, who warned yesterday that about any consequences that could happen to the ship, because the question that arose after the statement from Sheikh Nasrallah is why he made such a public statement. I mean, usually, why he did not keep it secret? Maybe it would have been more efficient. But it has actually he made it purposefully, such a public statement, due to the fact that he wants to show to the world, to Lebanese people, to the Ummah maybe, that actually if something happens to this boat, he will bear, those who do something against this boat will bear dramatic consequences. So that's why he said during his statement that this boat is part of the Lebanese territory, even though it is arguably from a legal point of view. He wants just to warn that any bombing, for example, from Israeli army on this boat it means potentially that it could be an attack on Lebanese territory. Also, it's also a warning on the Egyptian authorities, not only to Israeli authorities, because this boat has to go through the Suez Canal. So it means that the Egyptian authorities could potentially block this ship because as there is an Egyptian sovereignty on the Suez Strait. So it means that, for example, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, not to name him, the Egyptian president, could simply block, could put his veto, and this ship could be simply blocked, and the humanitarian aid will not be delivered to Lebanon. So, I mean, clearly, Sheikh Nasrallah understands that there are a lot of hurdles ahead, and he prefers to show to the world that Iran is a great supporter of Lebanon, that Iran wants to help Lebanon, but there are potential hurdles. And if that happens, he could now tell to the Lebanese people, Iran wanted to help you, but other powers prevented it, and that's why you still do not have fuel, not electricity, some basic products are missing on the shelf of supermarkets. So we understand that right now, in terms of communication, it's quite successful, let's say, because the best proof is a couple of hours after the statement from Nasrallah. As I said, Egyptian authorities announced also that they will help Lebanon. So we could hear also perhaps over the next days that France will help Lebanon. So we see that now there is a competition for humanitarian help for Lebanon. Also, France organized, for example, set up a meeting, 2 months ago, I think, about helping the Lebanese army, because also some soldiers are not able to eat decently, let's say, among the Lebanese soldiers. And the French Ministry of Defense, France Parly, was really worried that, for example, that it could have a repercussion, let's say, on the stability of Lebanon if, for example, soldiers could revolt. And that's why they raised some money for the Lebanese army. So, I mean, let's say many people try to do their best to help Lebanon, but it could not be perhaps sufficient, let's say, to prevent maybe a war in the region, because, I mean, there are, let's say, rising tension in the region. So, due to the fact that Lebanon is, let's say, due to some countries are currently violating also the Lebanese sovereignty. I mean, not later than yesterday evening, for example, the Israeli army bombed Syria and used the Lebanese, as usual, they use the Lebanese airspace, let's say, to bomb Syria. But unlike the previous times when Israel bombed Syria, this time, I mean, it has, let's say, people from Beirut was woken up in the middle of the night due to the, let's say, resounding noise that it created. So, I mean, that's why today the Defense Ministry of Lebanon, Mr. Akar, brought, let's say, the case to the United Nations. It's not clear whether the Security Council of the United Nations will be seized. And clearly, this, let's say, violation of the airspace of Lebanon is clearly a violation of the 1701 UN resolution. So this resolution has brought an end to the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in August 2006. So it remains to be seen whether this, let's say, this resolution could be saved. If we are not able, let's say, to save, let's say, the validity of this resolution, so it means that a war can erupt at any time in the region. And there are more and more signs that a war can erupt at any time, as shown, for example, 2 weeks ago when Hezbollah launched 19 rockets on the Israeli territory. So it was perfectly calculated. The risk was perfectly calculated. And the retaliation from the Israeli army was also calculated not to bring, let's say, things to a war. But at any time, some miscalculation from one side or to another side can occur and a war can start. And we are very close to a breaking point in this region. Because due to, let's say, the ongoing war in Syria, due to the, let's say, the rising, the humanitarian crisis in Lebanon, let's say, the possibility of a bankruptcy over the next week from Lebanon, or any social, let's say, explosion that could happen in Lebanon. I mean, there are a lot of factors, let's say, who could bring let's say, Lebanon to a war, let's say, regional war, and that's actually the main concern in the region. And probably that's why yesterday the head of intelligence service of Egypt came to Israel. He met the Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Israeli Prime Minister. We don't know exactly about what they discussed, but we know that Israel and Egypt are more and more concerned about growing tension on the Israeli-Syrian border, the Israeli-Lebanese border, the tension also between Israel and Gaza. And so probably the Egyptian who plays the role of mediator between Israel and the rest of the countries are probably warning the Israeli authorities about imminent war, about the opening of several fronts in the region. And also, an interesting point, we are now talking about a visit of Israeli Prime Minister to Egypt over the next days. So if it occurs, it would be the first historical, it would be a first visit of an Israeli Prime Minister in Egypt. So it would be clearly an historic visit. We've only seen so far an Egyptian president, Anwar Sadat, coming to Israel, but on the other side, no Israeli leaders except foreign ministers came to Egypt, like the previous foreign minister, Mr. Ashkenazi, came to Egypt 3 months ago. But Israeli prime minister would be the first time. So it's very interesting, let's say, in terms of, let's say, timing, due to the fact that those rising tension in the region probably push Israel and Egypt to, let's say, to strengthen their strategic ties in order, let's say, to push back any possibility of tension and war in the region. So it remains to be seen whether those growing tension in Lebanon could result in a regional war.